The House That Remembered, Part 1, The Invitation. Margaret Sullivan had always believed that family came first. It was a principle carved into her bones by a mother who'd raised 5 children through the Depression, and a father who'd worked double shifts at the factory to keep them fed. Now, at 63, standing in the doorway of her 3-bedroom colonial in suburban Connecticut, Margaret was about to test that principle in ways she never imagined. "Mom, you're a lifesaver," Daniel said, hauling another box from the U-Haul. Her son looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting debt. At 35, he should have been in his prime, but the layoff from the tech company had hit him hard. "We'll be back on our feet in no time. 3 months, tops." Margaret wanted to believe him. She pulled her cardigan tighter against the October chill and watched as her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, emerged from the truck carrying only her purse and a garment bag. Not a single box, not even a lamp or a framed photo, just designer accessories and an expression that suggested she was doing Margaret a favor by gracing her doorstep. "The guest room will need new curtains," Vanessa announced, not bothering with a greeting. "Those floral ones are absolutely tragic, and we'll need to discuss the bathroom situation. I assume Daniel and I get the master bath?" Margaret felt something cold settle in her chest, but she pushed it down. This was temporary. Her son needed her. That's what mothers did. They helped. She'd been alone in this house for 5 years since Harold passed, and maybe having family around again would fill some of that emptiness. "You'll have the upstairs bathroom," Margaret said gently. "I'm in the master bedroom, so—" "We'll see," Vanessa interrupted, brushing past her into the house. "Daniel, where did you put my makeup case? I need to start unpacking the essentials." Daniel shot his mother an apologetic look, but said nothing. He'd never said anything when Vanessa spoke that way. Margaret watched him follow his wife inside, his shoulders already hunched in that defeated posture she'd been noticing more and more over the past year. The house that Margaret and Harold had built together suddenly felt smaller. That first week passed in a blur of adjustments. Margaret found herself tiptoeing around her own house, careful not to disturb the couple who'd taken over the upstairs. She'd wake at 6, as she always had, and creep down to make coffee as quietly as possible. By 7, she'd have breakfast prepared, scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and by 7:30, she'd hear Vanessa's voice drifting down the stairs. "Daniel, tell your mother we don't eat breakfast this early. We're not farmers." Margaret would cover the food and slip out to her garden, where the chrysanthemums were just beginning to bloom. Harold had planted them the year before he died, and tending them made her feel close to him still. She'd spend an hour out there, her knees aching on the kneeling pad, pulling weeds and heading flowers, while the morning sun warmed her back. By the time she came inside, the kitchen would be a disaster. Coffee grounds scattered across the counter, dishes piled in the sink, the carton of milk left out to spoil. Vanessa would be on the couch in a living room, scrolling through her phone, while Daniel sat at the dining table with his laptop, searching job listings with increasing desperation. "Daniel, honey, I made sandwiches for lunch if you're hungry." "We're doing intermittent fasting. It's very trendy. You should try it, Margaret. Might help with that extra weight." Margaret was 5'4" and weighed 140 pounds, the same as she'd weighed for the past 20 years. But she'd learned quickly that responding to Vanessa's comments only made things worse. So she'd retreat to her sewing room, the small space off the kitchen that Harold had converted for her 40th birthday, and lose herself in quilting. 3 weeks in, the dynamic shifted again. Margaret returned from her weekly grocery run to find her bedroom door open. She always kept it closed. It was one of the few boundaries she'd managed to maintain. Inside, Vanessa was standing in front of the full-length mirror, holding up one of Margaret's dresses against her body. "Oh good, you're back," she said, without a trace of embarrassment. "I was just seeing if any of your clothes might work for me. We're trying to save money, after all. But I'm afraid your style is a bit mature for me." The dress she was holding was the emerald green one Harold had bought Margaret for their 30th anniversary. They'd gone dancing that night at the country club, spinning across the floor while their friends applauded. It was one of Margaret's most treasured possessions. "That's not for wearing," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's special." "Everything's just stuff, Margaret," Vanessa said, tossing the dress onto the bed. "You can't take it with you.
Anyway, Daniel and I were talking, and we really think we should have this room. It's twice the size of the guest room, and we need the space. You'd be perfectly comfortable upstairs. This is my room, Margaret said, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. This is my house. Technically, yes, Vanessa replied, examining her manicure. But we're family now. We're supposed to share. Unless you want Daniel stressed out even more than he already is. Stress can cause heart attacks, just like what happened to Harold. The casual cruelty of it struck Margaret like a physical blow. She stood frozen in the doorway while Vanessa swept past her, calling out for Daniel to come help move their things.
That night, Margaret slept in the guest room for the first time in 38 years. She lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of her own house gone foreign. In the darkness, Margaret made a decision. She would give them 3 more months, as Daniel had originally promised. Then they would leave. She just had to endure a little longer. Part 2. The erosion. But 3 months came and went, and Daniel and Vanessa showed no signs of leaving. Winter settled over Connecticut with unusual ferocity, dumping snow by the foot and driving temperatures below zero. Margaret paid the heating bills without complaint, even as they tripled. The house was always too hot now. Vanessa liked it at 78 degrees, claiming anything less made her joints ache. The guest room had become her permanent residence. Her clothes were crammed into a single closet. Her jewelry box sat on a dresser that wasn't hers. Even the bed felt wrong, too soft, too low, too much like surrender. "Mom, can you do my laundry?" Daniel asked one Saturday morning. Vanessa's been feeling under the weather. Margaret looked up from the kitchen table, where she'd been going through bills. The electric company had sent a disconnect notice, so had the water company. She'd paid those bills. She always paid the bills, but apparently not fast enough. Under the weather, how? Margaret asked. Just tired. She needs rest. Vanessa was 28 years old and had no job, no responsibilities, and slept until noon most days. She couldn't imagine what she needed rest from, but she held her tongue. "I'll take care of it," she said. She did their laundry, 4 loads, all of it expensive brands that required special care. Hand wash only, lay flat to dry. While she worked, she could hear Vanessa upstairs, laughing at something on her phone. The sound drifted down like mockery. By February, Margaret had developed a permanent knot between her shoulder blades. Her doctor said it was stress and prescribed muscle relaxers, but Margaret didn't fill the prescription. She couldn't afford the copay. The money she'd saved so carefully, the nest egg that was supposed to last her through retirement, was evaporating. Daniel still hadn't found work. He'd had interviews, dozens of them, but nothing materialized. Margaret suspected he was being too selective, holding out for a position that matched his previous salary and status. Meanwhile, Vanessa had abandoned all pretense of job hunting. When Margaret gently suggested she might look for something part-time, just to help out, Vanessa had laughed in her face. "I'm not working retail, if that's what you're suggesting. I have a degree in marketing from Boston University. I'm not going to damage my resume with some minimum wage garbage." "Any work is honest work," Margaret said. "Easy for you to say. You were a secretary." The word dripped with condescension. Margaret had been an executive assistant for 30 years, supporting 3 different CEOs through company expansions, mergers, and one near bankruptcy that she'd helped navigate with her organizational skills and quiet competence. She'd been good at her job. People had respected her. But to Vanessa, she was just a secretary, just a housewife who didn't understand the modern world. Margaret excused herself and went to her sewing room, but even that sanctuary had been compromised. Vanessa had started using it as a storage space for online shopping deliveries. Boxes were stacked against the walls, filled with clothes and makeup and home decor items that Margaret suspected would never be used. "How are you paying for all this?" Margaret finally asked one evening, unable to contain herself any longer. "Daniel's credit cards," Vanessa said breezily. "We'll pay them off once he gets a job."
Those credit cards are probably nearly maxed out. That's really none of your business, Margaret. It is my business. This is my house, my utilities, my food, my everything. And you're spending money you don't have while I'm struggling to keep the lights on. Struggling? Vanessa laughed, a sharp bark of sound. Oh, please. You own this house free and clear. You have Harold's life insurance. You're collecting Social Security. Don't pretend you're some martyr. That money is supposed to last me the rest of my life. Then maybe you should budget better. Margaret felt dizzy. The room tilted around her, walls pressing in. She gripped the back of a chair to steady herself.
I want you to leave, she said quietly. Both of you. I've been patient. I've tried to help, but this isn't working.
Daniel, Vanessa called out, your mother is throwing us out.
Daniel appeared in the doorway, looking stricken. Mom, what's going on? I asked them to find somewhere else to live, Margaret said, keeping her voice level. It's time. Where are we supposed to go? Daniel's voice cracked. We don't have money for an apartment. I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying, but the job market is brutal right now. Just give me a little more time. Margaret looked at her son. Really looked at him. He'd lost weight. His hair was thinning. There were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. He looked like a man drowning, and she was the only lifeline he had. Her anger deflated like a punctured balloon. She whispered, "A little more time." Vanessa smirked, victorious. She linked her arm through Daniel's and led him away, whispering something that made him nod and hang his head even lower. Margaret sank into the chair and put her face in her hands. She'd lost. She'd drawn a line in the sand, and they'd simply stepped over it. Part 3. The Breaking Point. March brought rain instead of snow, endless gray days that turned the world to mud. Margaret's garden was dormant, sleeping under the wet earth, and she felt the same way, dormant, waiting for something she couldn't name. The house had fallen into chaos. Dishes sat unwashed for days. Trash overflowed the bins. Margaret cleaned when she could, but it felt like bailing water from a sinking ship. "Can you pick up after yourselves?" she asked one morning, surveying the wreckage of the kitchen. "We're dealing with a lot right now, Margaret. Maybe try to be more understanding." "I am understanding. I'm just asking for basic respect. Respect is a two-way street. You're always nagging at us, making us feel unwelcome. If you don't like living with us, maybe you should leave." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Margaret stared at Vanessa, certain she'd misheard. "What did you just say?" "You heard me." Vanessa finally looked up, her expression defiant. "You're always complaining, always acting like we're such a burden. If it's that bad, there are plenty of senior living communities around here. You could probably find something nice. Then Daniel and I could have the house to ourselves. Stop walking on eggshells all the time." "This is my house," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "My house. Harold and I bought this house in 1987. We raised Daniel here. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement, that was us. You've been here 5 months and contributed nothing, and now you're telling me to leave my own home? It's just a house, Margaret. Bricks and wood. Family is more important. I thought you believed that." Family. Margaret felt something crack inside her chest. You wouldn't know family if it hit you in the face. Family doesn't take advantage. Family doesn't disrespect. Family doesn't— "Mom." Daniel's voice came from the doorway. "Please don't fight. Daniel, did you hear what your wife just said to me?" He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Vanessa's stressed. We both are. Maybe everyone just needs to calm down." "I'm not the one who needs to calm down. I'm not the one who just suggested your mother should move out of her own house." Margaret walked out of the kitchen, through the living room, out the front door. She didn't grab a coat, didn't grab her purse. She just walked, down the driveway and onto the sidewalk, into the cold March drizzle. She walked for over an hour, through neighborhoods that had changed and neighborhoods that hadn't, past houses where families were living their normal, unburdened lives. Her feet led her to the cemetery where Harold was buried. His headstone was simple granite, engraved with his name, dates, and the words, "beloved husband and father." Margaret stood in front of it,
rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears. "I don't know what to do," she told him. "Our son is lost. I don't even recognize him anymore. And I'm losing everything. The house, my dignity, my peace. I keep trying to help, but it's like pouring water into sand." The rain fell harder. Thunder rumbled in the distance. "I need you to tell me what to do."
But Harold was silent, as he'd been for 5 years. Margaret was alone with this. She walked back home slowly. Something had shifted during that walk in the rain. A decision had crystallized, sharp and clear as ice. She would not leave her house. She would not be driven out. But she would also not continue as she had been, accommodating and appeasing and slowly suffocating. She would take back what was hers. Part 4, the plan. Margaret had always been methodical. She approached her current situation the same way she'd once approached corporate problems, with careful observation and strategic planning. First, she needed information. She spent a week cataloging everything: Vanessa's shopping habits, Daniel's routine, their arguments, their patterns. She noted that Daniel usually went to the library on Tuesday and Thursday mornings for job searches. She observed that Vanessa left the house every Wednesday for what she claimed were networking lunches, though she always returned smelling of wine. Second, she needed allies. Margaret started making phone calls to people she'd neglected. Her best friend, Patricia, who'd been leaving increasingly concerned messages. Her sister, Linda, in Florida. She was careful not to complain directly, but she let them know her situation. "I'd love to come visit, but I don't want to intrude with Daniel and Vanessa there." "Oh, please come. I miss you. And honestly, I could use the moral support." Patricia arrived the following Sunday with a casserole and sharp eyes that took in the state of the house immediately. When they retreated to Margaret's sewing room, Patricia let loose. "This is insane. You're living like a refugee in your own home." "It's temporary." "It's March. They moved in October. That's 5 months. Daniel's looking for work. Daniel is enabling his nightmare wife, and you're enabling both of them." Patricia grabbed Margaret's hands. "Honey, you're drowning. This isn't sustainable." "I know." Margaret felt the relief of admission. "I know it's not. I'm working on it." "Working on what?" "Getting my life back." The third step was leverage. Margaret started documenting everything. She kept copies of bills she'd paid, grocery receipts, every expense. She created a spreadsheet tracking it all, with precision. The numbers were devastating. In 5 months, she'd spent over $30,000 supporting them. Her savings had been cut in half. At this rate, she'd be broke in less than a year. She also started recording conversations. She'd leave a small digital recorder running in common areas, tucked behind picture frames. It felt wrong, but this was her house. She had every right to document what happened within her own walls. The recordings were illuminating. "God, I can't stand her hovering, always asking if we need anything. It's so pathetic." "She's just trying to help." Daniel's voice, weaker. "She's trying to make us feel guilty. Classic manipulation. We need to start setting harder boundaries. This is going to be our house eventually anyway, once she dies. Might as well start treating it like it." Margaret listened 3 times, letting each word carve itself into her memory. Our house eventually. Once she dies. She copied it, backed it up, saved it in the cloud. Evidence. Proof. Ammunition. By April, Margaret had everything she needed: documentation, witnesses, recordings. She had Patricia ready to support her. She had a lawyer on retainer. But more importantly, she had a plan. Phase 1 began on a Tuesday morning. Daniel left for the library as usual. As soon as his car disappeared, Margaret made her move. She went to the master bedroom and began packing their belongings. Everything. Clothes, toiletries, shoes, jewelry, all of it went into boxes. She worked quickly and efficiently, years of organizational skills making the process swift. By 10:30, everything Daniel and Vanessa owned was stacked in the guest room. Margaret then changed the locks on the master bedroom. She'd had a locksmith install a deadbolt the day before. She locked the door and pocketed the key. Phase 2 was the internet. She called the provider and changed the Wi-Fi password. She also downgraded the service to basic, enough for her needs, not enough for Vanessa's constant streaming. By 11, when Vanessa woke up and came downstairs, Margaret was in the kitchen making lunch. "Morning,"
Margaret said pleasantly. Vanessa mumbled a greeting and went for coffee. She took a sip and frowned. Why is it so cold in here? 65 degrees. That's the setting now. Can you turn it up? I'm freezing. No. Vanessa blinked. What? I said no. 65 is the temperature. It's expensive to heat this house, and I'm on a budget. This is ridiculous. Vanessa marched to the thermostat and pressed buttons. It's not working. It's locked. I have the key.
Vanessa turned slowly. You locked the thermostat? I did. This is my house, and I'm managing my expenses now. If you're cold, wear a sweater. This is insane. You can't just... Vanessa's phone buzzed. She looked at it, then at Margaret. Why isn't the Wi-Fi working? I changed the password. Give it to me. No. Margaret watched emotions flicker across Vanessa's face. Shock, fury, disbelief. What the hell is going on? Vanessa demanded. What's going on is that I'm setting new rules. My house, my rules. From now on, you and Daniel will pay rent, $500 a month, due on the 1st. You'll split utilities 50-50. You'll buy your own groceries and do your own laundry. You'll clean up after yourselves. And you'll treat me with respect or you'll leave. You can't do this. I absolutely can. In fact, I should have done it months ago. Daniel will never agree to this. Then Daniel can move out with you. I'm calling him right now. Vanessa grabbed her phone and stormed toward the stairs. Vanessa, Margaret called after her, your things are in the guest room now. I've taken back my bedroom. The shriek that followed was almost satisfying. Daniel arrived home an hour later to chaos. Vanessa launched into a tirade, her words tumbling over each other. Margaret waited in the kitchen, calm as still water. When Daniel appeared in the doorway, his face was pale. Mom, what's going on? Sit down, Daniel. I don't want to sit. Sit down. Something in her voice made him obey. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a flash drive. She set it on the table. What's that? Daniel asked. Evidence. Recordings of conversations in this house. Receipts documenting every dollar I've spent supporting you over 5 months. A detailed account of the disrespect and exploitation I've endured. Abuse? Mom, nobody's abused you. Really? Margaret pressed play on her phone. Vanessa's voice filled the kitchen. This is going to be our house eventually anyway, once she dies. Might as well start treating it like it. Daniel's face went white. There's more, Margaret said. Hours of it. Your wife discussing how pathetic I am, how she can't wait until I'm gone, and how she plans to redecorate when she has the place to herself. I never agreed with any of that, Daniel whispered. No, you just stayed silent, which is almost worse. Margaret leaned forward. I love you, Daniel. You're my son, and I would do anything for you, but I will not be disrespected in my own home. I will not be treated like a burden. I will not be taken advantage of anymore. So you're throwing us out? No, I'm giving you a choice. Stay under my rules, paying rent and pulling your weight, or leave, but the free ride is over. Daniel put his head in his hands. The rent, the utilities, we can't afford it. Then get jobs, any jobs. Vanessa needs to stop waiting for perfection. You need to accept you might not get your old salary back immediately. Welcome to reality, Daniel. Most people live here. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, makeup smeared from crying. So you're forcing us onto the street? You're not on the street. You're in a warm, safe house. You just have to contribute now, like adults. I can't believe you do this to your own son. I'm not doing anything to him. I'm stopping you from doing things to me. The standoff lasted 20 minutes, with Vanessa alternating between tears and rage. Finally, they retreated upstairs, their voices carrying through the vents. Margaret sat alone in the kitchen, her hands shaking now that it was over. She'd done it. She'd drawn the line and held it. Patricia called an hour later. How are you? I did it. I stood up to them. And? Now I wait. Margaret, I'm proud of you. The words broke something loose, and Margaret cried, not from despair, but from relief. Part 5. The Shift. They stayed. Within a week, Vanessa had a job at a boutique clothing store. It was retail, exactly what she'd claimed she'd never do, but pride was negotiable when faced with homelessness.
Daniel found work at a call center for half his previous salary. He left at 7 a.m. and returned at 6 p.m., looking exhausted, but somehow more solid. They paid the first month's rent 3 days late, in crumpled 20s and 10s, like admitting defeat. The house began to change. With Vanessa working, the mess decreased. Daniel started cooking dinner sometimes. The living room stayed cleaner, and crucially, they stayed out of Margaret's way. The master bedroom was hers again. She redecorated, removing any trace of Vanessa's occupation. Fresh paint, a soft blue Harold had always wanted. New curtains, new bedding, everything chosen to erase the violation. She could breathe again in her own room. Patricia called an hour later. "How are you?" "I did it. I stood up to them." "And?" "Now I wait." "Margaret, I'm proud of you." The words broke something loose, and Margaret cried, not from despair, but from relief. Patricia visited every Sunday now, offering commentary with characteristic bluntness. "Vanessa looks miserable," Patricia observed one morning. "Good," Margaret said, surprising herself. "I thought you'd feel bad." "They're doing what they should have been doing from the beginning, working, contributing, being responsible. I'm not making them struggle. I'm just not enabling them to avoid reality anymore." "Fair point. How's Daniel?" "Better than I expected. I think part of him is relieved. He was drowning trying to keep Vanessa happy. Now there's no pretending." "And Vanessa?"
Vanessa hates me. Margaret said it without emotion. Which is fine. I'd rather be hated and respected than loved and taken advantage of. The words felt true. Something had fundamentally shifted in Margaret. The woman who'd tiptoed through her own house was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, less willing to bend. Harold would have been proud. May arrived with unexpected warmth. Margaret spent her mornings in the garden again, planting tomatoes and peppers. The physical work grounded her. Daniel found her there one Saturday morning. "Mom, can we talk?" She looked up at him. He looked different, cleaner, more present. "Of course." She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. They sat on the back porch. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "For everything, for how we treated you, for taking advantage, for letting Vanessa speak to you that way. I'm sorry for being a coward." Margaret felt her throat tighten. "Daniel, let me finish. I knew what was happening. I saw how Vanessa disrespected you, and I told myself it was just stress, just temporary. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of losing her. Scared of her anger. Scared of being the bad guy. So I let you be the bad guy instead. You were struggling. That's not an excuse. You took us in when we had nothing, and we repaid you by treating you like a servant." His voice cracked. "Dad would be ashamed of me." Margaret took his hand. "Your father loved you. He'd be disappointed, yes, but he'd also be proud that you're recognizing it now. I want to do better. Vanessa and I have been talking, really talking. And honestly, I don't know if we're going to make it." Margaret had suspected as much. There was a distance between them now, a careful politeness that spoke of fractures running deep. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want to figure out who I am. I want to work and earn my way and not feel like a failure. I want to make you proud." "Oh, honey," Margaret squeezed his hand. "I am proud. You're working hard, paying your way, taking responsibility. That's all I ever wanted." They sat in silence, the morning sun warming their faces, birds singing in the trees. Margaret felt something loosening in her chest. Maybe there was hope after all. But Vanessa was hardening like cement. She came home each day with new grievances. The customers were stupid. Her manager was incompetent. She'd complained bitterly about folding clothes for minimum wage. "I have a degree. I'm better than this." Margaret stopped engaging. The complaints bounced off her now. The tension built like atmospheric pressure before a storm.
Margaret knew something was going to break. It came on a Tuesday evening in late May. Margaret was in her sewing room when Vanessa burst in without knocking. "This is all your fault," Vanessa spat. Her face was blotchy, her eyes wild. "You've ruined everything." Margaret set down her rotary cutter. "What are you talking about?" "Daniel just told me he wants a separation. He wants to stay here and work on himself, and he wants me to leave. Because of you. I've barely spoken to either of you in weeks. You don't have to speak. You just sit there acting so superior, making me feel like trash every day." "Vanessa," Daniel appeared in the doorway. "That's enough." "Don't you that's enough me. Your mother started all this with her petty power plays. Mom said boundaries. Boundaries we should have respected from the beginning. So now you're on her side? There are no sides. That's the problem. You've made everything into a battle. I'm exhausted, Vanessa. Exhausted from defending you, from making excuses, from pretending the way you treat people is okay. It's not okay." Vanessa stared at him like he'd slapped her. "After everything we've been through has been largely because of choices you made. The spending, the attitude, the refusal to work. I went along with it because I was weak, but I'm not doing that anymore." "Fine." Vanessa's voice went cold. "I'll pack my stuff and leave. You'll realize what a mistake you made." She stormed out. We heard her upstairs, slamming drawers, cursing. Daniel sank into a chair, his face in his hands. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "Don't apologize." Margaret put a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing." "Why doesn't it feel right?" "Because endings never do, even when they're necessary." An hour later, Vanessa came down with 2 suitcases. She'd called a friend who had a spare room. She didn't say goodbye to Margaret, didn't even look at her, just walked out and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The house fell into profound silence. Margaret made tea. Daniel sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't know, is that weird?" "Not weird at all. Part of me feels relieved, and part of me feels like the worst person in the world." "That's normal. You loved her." "I did." Daniel wrapped his hands around the mug. "But I don't think she ever loved me. Not really. I think she loved what she thought I could give her. When I couldn't provide that anymore, there was nothing left." Margaret didn't disagree. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Stay here, if that's okay. Keep working, save money, figure out who I am." He looked at her. "And make things right with you. Really right." "You already are," Margaret said. "Just by being honest." They sat together in the quiet kitchen, drinking tea as the evening light faded. Outside, the garden was in full bloom. Life, Margaret thought, had a way of persisting. Part 6. Rebuilding. Summer settled over Connecticut. Margaret's garden exploded with color. Sunflowers, tomatoes, zucchini growing faster than she could give them away. She spent mornings outside, afternoons sewing, evenings reading on the porch while Daniel grilled dinner. It was simple and quiet, and Margaret treasured it. Patricia came for dinner one Friday in July, bringing wine and stories. They ate on the patio under string lights Margaret had hung. "This is nice," Patricia said. "You seem happy, Maggie." "I am happy," Margaret realized, for the first time in a long time. "You earned it," Daniel said, "both the happiness and the peace." "We all did," Margaret corrected. "We all did the work." After Patricia left, they cleaned up together, washing dishes side by side. "I got a job offer today," Daniel said, casually. Margaret nearly dropped the plate. "What? That's wonderful. Software company in Hartford. Senior developer. The pay is good. Not what I made before, but close. Benefits, flexibility, room for growth." He paused. "I start in 2 weeks." "Daniel, I'm so proud of you." "Which means I need to talk about living arrangements." Margaret's heart sank. Of course, he was moving out. It was natural. He didn't want to live with his mother forever. "I understand. You need your own space." "Actually, I was hoping I could stay. Not forever, but for a while longer. I want to save up a real down payment, build up my emergency fund, get completely stable. If I stay here another year, maybe two, I could do that. But only if you want me here. Margaret studied her son's face. He looked hopeful, but uncertain.
What about rent? She asked. I'd like to pay more, $750 a month, plus half of all utilities and groceries. Fair market value for a room and shared living space. That's too much. It's what I'd pay for an apartment. And this is better. I get home-cooked meals sometimes, good company, and a garden to sit in. That's worth $750. Margaret felt tears threatening. You really want to stay? I really do, if you'll have me. She pulled him into a hug. This son who'd gotten lost but found his way back. Of course I'll have you. This is your home too. They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and Margaret went to bed that night feeling like the house was finally whole again. August brought Daniel's new job, and with it, a schedule that worked beautifully. He'd leave at 8, return at 5:30, and they'd have dinner together most nights. Weekends, he'd work in the garden with Margaret, or they'd watch old movies, or he'd disappear to the library for coding projects. The house settled into a routine that felt sustainable, healthy. They respected each other's space. They communicated openly. They shared responsibilities without keeping score. Margaret finished the wedding ring quilt and started a new project, a memory quilt made from Harold's old shirts. She'd been avoiding it for years, unable to face cutting up his clothes. But now she felt ready. Each piece was a memory. The flannel he wore for weekend projects, the dress shirt from their anniversary dinner, the soft cotton t-shirt he'd worn every Saturday morning. Daniel found her crying over it one afternoon. You okay, Mom? Yes, she said, wiping her eyes. Just missing him. Me too. Daniel sat beside her, picking up a square of blue fabric. This was his favorite shirt, wasn't it? The one he wore to my college graduation? It was. They sat together in the sewing room, surrounded by pieces of Harold, remembering. He'd be proud of you, Daniel said, of how you handled everything, how you stood up for yourself. He'd be proud of you too, for doing the hard work of changing. I hope so. Margaret squeezed his hand. I know so. September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of fall color. Margaret's neighbor Dorothy had a stroke and needed to move to assisted living. Her daughter asked if Margaret knew anyone interested in buying the house. Daniel, Margaret said over dinner that night, would you ever want to buy a house? Eventually, sure. Why? Dorothy's house is going on the market. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, corner lot. It needs work, but the bones are good. Daniel set down his fork. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying you've been saving money, you have a good job now, and there's a house right next door that would let you have your own space while still being close. If something happened to me, you'd be right there. If you needed anything, I'd be right here. That's actually perfect. Daniel's face lit up. I could probably qualify for a mortgage now with my salary and savings, and being next door to you would be ideal. So you'll think about it? I'm already thinking about it. Within a month, Daniel had made an offer, been accepted, and was navigating the home buying process with enthusiasm Margaret hadn't seen in him in years. He'd come home and talk about inspection reports and mortgage rates and renovation plans. He sketched ideas for updating the kitchen, for turning the basement into a home office, for planting a garden that would connect to Margaret's. I never thought I'd be this excited about caulking, he admitted one evening. Margaret laughed. Home ownership will do that to you. The closing was scheduled for mid-October, exactly a year after Daniel and Vanessa had moved in. The symmetry was not lost on either of them. Part 7. Full circle. October arrived with brilliant foliage and crisp air. Margaret stood in her garden harvesting the last tomatoes, thinking about how much had changed in a year. Last October, she was preparing to welcome her son and daughter-in-law, full of hope and anxiety. This October, she was preparing to help her son move into his own home next door,
full of pride and certainty. The night before Daniel's closing, they had a quiet dinner together. "I've been thinking about doing something to thank you. For everything, you don't need to thank me." "I do, though. You took me in when I had nothing. You put up with me at my worst. You stood up to Vanessa and me when we needed it, even though it was hard. You taught me what real strength looks like." "Daniel?"
Let me finish. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." Margaret opened it to find a check for $15,000. "Daniel, no, I can't accept this. It's not even half of what you spent supporting us, but it's what I can afford right now, and I want you to have it. Use it for retirement or a vacation or whatever you want. You've earned it." Margaret's hands shook. "This is too much. It's not enough. It'll never be enough to repay what you've done, but it's a start." She looked at her son, this man who'd been broken and lost and had somehow found his way back to himself, and felt overwhelming love mixed with relief. He was going to be okay. They were both going to be okay. "Thank you," she whispered. They hugged, and Margaret let herself cry, not from sadness, but from the sheer emotional weight of the journey they'd been on together. The day of Daniel's closing was unseasonably warm, one of those gift days autumn sometimes provides. Margaret helped him move the few belongings he'd accumulated. Not much, just clothes and books and furniture he'd bought secondhand. Patricia came to help, along with a few of Daniel's coworkers who'd become friends. They made a party of it, hauling boxes and laughing, ordering pizza for lunch. "Next thing you know, you'll be complaining about property taxes," one of the guys said. "There's no HOA, thank God. Just me and the best neighbor anyone could ask for." He nodded toward Margaret, and she felt her cheeks warm. By evening, most of Daniel's things were moved, though he'd sleep at Margaret's for a few more days while setting up utilities. They stood in his empty living room, boxes stacked around them. "What?" Margaret asked, seeing his expression. "I'm just thinking about where I was a year ago, how lost I was, how I'd given up on myself. And now? Now I own a house, I have a job I like, I'm in therapy and actually working on my issues. I have a relationship with my mother that's honest and real." I shook my head. A year ago, I would have said none of this was possible. "What changed?" Margaret asked. "You did. You stopped enabling me and started believing I could be better. You set boundaries and held them, even when it was hard, even when I resisted. You showed me what it looks like to respect yourself and demand respect from others. You did the hard part. You chose to change. Because you made me, in the best way." They stood in the fading light, surrounded by evidence of new beginnings, and Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not hope that things would go back to how they were, but hope that what came next would be even better. Daniel officially moved into his house the following week. Margaret helped him unpack and organize, offering suggestions, but letting him make his own decisions. It was his space, his home, his fresh start. She returned to her own house that evening to find it quiet in a way that should have felt lonely, but didn't. The silence was peaceful, not oppressive. She made herself dinner, ate on the patio, and watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Her phone rang. Linda calling for their weekly chat. "How's it going with Daniel?" Linda asked. "He moved into his own house today, right next door." "That worked out perfectly." "It really did." Margaret smiled. "Linda, I need to tell you something. You were right." "About what?" "About me being too accommodating, about needing to set boundaries. I warned you back in October that letting them move in might not go well, and I got defensive. But you were right." "I'm not gonna say I told you so," Linda said. "You can if you want. You earned it." "Fine, I told you so," Linda laughed. "But seriously, Maggie, I'm proud of you. Standing up to them couldn't have been easy. It was the hardest thing I've done in years, but also the most necessary." They talked for an hour, and when Margaret hung up, she felt connected to her life in a way she hadn't in months. She had her home back. She had her peace back. She had herself back. November brought the first snow and the holidays looming. Margaret started planning Thanksgiving, something she hadn't hosted since Harold died. She invited Daniel, Patricia, and Linda was flying up from Florida.
A small gathering, manageable and meaningful. The night before Thanksgiving, while baking pies, Margaret heard a knock. She opened it to find Vanessa standing there, looking nervous. "Vanessa," Margaret said, surprised. "Hello?" "Hi, I'm sorry to just show up. Could we talk?" Margaret hesitated, then stepped back. "Come in." They sat in the living room. Vanessa looked different. Thinner, tired, but somehow more solid. Less polished, but more real. "I wanted to tell you in person that I'm moving to Boston. I got accepted into a graduate program for social work." "Social work?" Margaret couldn't hide her surprise. "I know, right? Me, helping people." Vanessa smiled self-deprecatingly. "My therapist suggested it, said I needed to get outside my own head, focus on something bigger than myself. And it turns out I'm good at it. I've been volunteering at a women's shelter and I actually like it. I feel useful for the first time in my life." "That's wonderful, Vanessa. I wanted to thank you before I left. I know that sounds insane, given how I treated you, but you actually did me a favor. When you set those boundaries, when you refused to let me walk all over you, it forced me to look at myself. And I didn't like what I saw, so I started changing." Margaret didn't know what to say. This vulnerable, self-aware woman was almost unrecognizable. "I hope you find what you're looking for," Margaret said finally. "I think I'm starting to." Vanessa stood. "I won't take up more of your time. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and I'm grateful, and I hope someday you can think of me without anger." "I don't think of you with anger," Margaret said honestly. "Not anymore." Vanessa smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "That's more than I deserve. Thank you, Margaret, for everything." She left and Margaret stood in the doorway watching her go, feeling like a chapter had finally closed. Thanksgiving Day was perfect. The turkey came out golden and juicy, the pies were flawless, and the house filled with laughter and conversation. Daniel carved the turkey with Harold's old carving set. Patricia told outrageous stories about cats at the shelter. Linda grilled Daniel good-naturedly about when he was going to start dating. "I'm working on myself," Daniel said. "You can work on yourself and still go on a date." "Leave him alone," Margaret said, laughing. They ate until they were stuffed, then moved to the living room. At some point, Margaret looked around at the people she loved in the home she'd fought to reclaim and felt profound gratitude. This was what she'd been fighting for. Not just the house, but the peace within it. Not just her space, but her sense of self. Not just survival, but a life worth living. Patricia caught her eye and raised her wineglass in a silent toast. Margaret raised hers in return. Epilogue: The woman who found herself. December arrived with fresh snow that transformed the neighborhood into a winter wonderland. Margaret and Daniel strung lights on both houses, creating a display that delighted the children on the street. They developed a routine of having coffee together most mornings, either at her house or his, before he left for work. One morning, as they sat at Margaret's kitchen table watching snowfall outside, Daniel said, "I got an email from Vanessa yesterday." "Oh." "She wanted to let me know she's doing well in Boston. She sounds happy. Different. I think maybe someday. Not now, but someday. We shared 5 years. It wasn't all bad, and people can change. I'm living proof." Margaret sipped her coffee. "You've changed so much this year." "I'm proud of you too. You showed me what it looks like to stand up for yourself even when it's terrifying." "It was terrifying," Margaret admitted. "I kept thinking, what if Daniel never speaks to me again? What if I lose my son? What if I'm wrong?" But you weren't wrong. You were exactly right. He needed someone to hold me accountable, to refuse to enable my dysfunction. Vanessa needed that too. We both needed you to stop being the martyr and start being the person with boundaries. I spent so much of my life trying to keep everyone happy. With your father, with you, with my job, always smoothing things over, always compromising, always putting myself last. It took almost losing everything to realize that's not kindness, that's cowardice. That's harsh. But it's true. Real kindness includes boundaries. Real love includes accountability. I was so afraid of conflict that I enabled behavior that hurt all of us. Do you think Dad knew that? I think your father tried to tell me, in his way, He'd say, "Maggie, you can't save everyone." But I never really heard him until it was almost too late.
Well, you hear him now. And you saved yourself, which is the most important thing. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow accumulate on the garden that would sleep through winter and bloom again in spring. Margaret thought about cycles, about seasons, about how life persisted even through the darkest times. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. "Lunch next week? My treat. Want to hear all about your holidays?" Margaret smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. I have so much to tell you." She looked around her kitchen, in her house, filled with morning light and the smell of fresh coffee. No tension crackling in the air, no resentment simmering beneath polite words. Just peace, hard-won and deeply treasured. "You know what I realized?" Margaret said to Daniel. "What's that?" "This whole experience, as painful as it was, taught me the most important lesson of my life, which is that I matter. My feelings matter. My boundaries matter. My life matters. For so long, I acted like I was just supporting cast in everyone else's story. But I'm the protagonist of my own life, and I get to decide what I will and won't accept." Daniel reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That's the best thing I've ever heard you say." Margaret squeezed back, feeling the strength in her own grip, the strength that had always been there, just waiting to be claimed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering everything in pristine white. A clean slate, a fresh start, the world made new again. And inside, in the house that remembered everything, Margaret Sullivan sat in her kitchen and understood, finally and fully, what it meant to be free. Not free from responsibility or connection or love, but free from the prison of her own fear. Free to set boundaries, free to demand respect, free to live on her own terms. She was 64 years old, and she was just beginning to understand who she really was. The woman who'd been scared to speak up was gone. The woman who apologized for existing had disappeared. In their place was someone Margaret recognized from long ago, the sharp, capable, quietly formidable woman she'd been before she started making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant to contain her. That woman was back, and she was never leaving again. Margaret raised her coffee cup in a private toast to herself, to her journey, to the hard-won peace that filled every corner of her reclaimed home. "To surviving," she said quietly. "To thriving," Daniel corrected. Margaret smiled. "Yes, to thriving." And in that moment, sitting in her kitchen with her son who'd found himself by almost losing everything, in the house she'd fought to reclaim from the people she'd loved enough to hold accountable, Margaret Sullivan understood what victory actually meant. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was simply about knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less than the respect you deserved. That was the lesson. That was the triumph. That was the truth she'd carry with her for the rest of her life. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.